One stepped forward in a ragged mantle and asked for direction, addressing him as liege. Kang Hyuk fixed them with a crimson stare and gave a terse order. He indicated a shadowed fissure in the rock. The skeletons fell into line and marched toward the dark corridor. Kang Hyuk lingered above while his skeletons crossed the broken bridge and filed into the fissure. They moved in rigid formation under his silent command, their sockets burning dimly. The corridor ahead opened into a barred hall hung with chains and a single harsh light at its far end. The quiet shattered with a staccato impact that echoed down the passage. Kang Hyuk was unbalanced by the shock and slammed against the floor, breath escaping him as motion blurred. From the gloom a pale, toothy beast with glowing red eyes snapped its head forward, teeth bared toward him. Kang Hyuk had watched his skeletons cross the bridge and enter the fissure before the hall erupted. The pale beast lunged from shadow with a snapping maw and struck at him. The impact spun him, and a spray of blood streaked across the corridor. Kang Hyuk's counterattack came as a furious motion that cleaved into the creature, scattering gore. Blood stained his face, but his lips curled into a feral grin. His eyes flared yellow, and a black caption floated declaring, "Damned monster." He held the moment with breath heavy and the passage ringing with wet echoes. Kang Hyuk watched his skeletons cross the patterned bridge and vanish into the fissure before the hall erupted. A pale beast lunged from shadow and struck him with a snapping maw. The impact spun him, and spray of blood streaked the corridor. He answered with a furious counterattack that cleaved the creature and scattered gore. Blood stained his face, and he grinned as his eyes flared yellow. A black caption labeled him "Damned Monster," while the passage echoed with wet sounds. The creature collapsed at his feet, and blood pooled across the ornate floor. Two attendants stared from behind, one gripping a sword with trembling hands. Others stepped forward in stunned silence until one shouted that it was dead. Kang Hyuk had watched his skeletons march across the patterned bridge and fall into the fissure before the hall erupted. A pale demonic beast lunged from shadow and bit him, spinning him as blood sprayed the corridor. He struck back with a furious counterattack that cleaved the creature and sent gore across the ornate floor. Blood stained his face, and his eyes flared yellow under a black caption that branded him "Damned Monster." The beast collapsed, and attendants froze in shock until one shouted that it was dead. They approached cautiously, called out for Kyuho, and offered a recovery potion while warning about poison from the corpse. He accepted the bottle, thanked them, and received quick praise for the kill and for breaking Kang Min's record. Kang Hyuk accepted praise and spoke with a relaxed grin. He claimed he had always broken Kang Min's record and shrugged off the fuss. 3 attendants crowded him, stunned and eager. He called the old praise bullshit and tossed the idea aside while flexing his advantage. One young man hesitated and defended Kang Min's strength, voice small against the swagger. The group paused, caught between awe and doubt, as murmurs spread through the ruined hall and the victor held his posture unrepentant. Kang Hyuk turned and addressed the newcomers with a relaxed grin and cold eyes. He singled out an unknown and called him forward under the ruined hall. The unknown stepped closer, voice small and obedient as the receptionists watched. Suddenly Kang Hyuk moved with brutal speed and slammed the unknown down hard. A blade flashed and pierced the unknown's chest, blood spraying. The unknown screamed, the crowd froze, and silence replaced the earlier celebration. Kang Hyuk held his posture as shocked faces registered fear and uncertainty. Kang Hyuk stood over the ruined hall with blood on his shirt. He forced Kang Min to kneel and demanded who was stronger. Kang Min panicked and admitted he had made a mistake. He stammered that Kang Hyuk was way stronger and feared the consequences. Kang Hyuk pressed his boot into humility and waited for the answer. Silence blanketed the crowd as faces registered shock and uncertainty. He smirked and the masked figures behind him closed ranks. The scene ended with menacing resolve. Kang Hyuk remained above the kneeling figure as the hall's light carved long shadows. The crowd held its breath and the masked men closed ranks. One subordinate asked Hwang Kyuho what to do with the captive. Kyuho replied that they should teach him some discipline and then withdraw. The reply sharpened their smiles. 2 men confirmed the order with eager grins. They agreed to meet later at the same place. The scene ended with the captive left exposed beneath their controlled menace. Kang Hyuk stayed above the kneeling captive as the men began to leave. One man barked a crude taunt and lit a cigarette with a slow smile. He praised their work and suggested they continue later for more fun. The man palmed a glowing crystal and slipped it into his pocket. He announced he would leave first, then stepped into a purple gate. Hwang Kyuho ordered them to teach the captive a lesson and depart quickly. Two masked men confirmed the order and promised they would arrive soon. Kang Hyuk remained above the kneeling captive, while two men loomed nearby. One man taunted the captive and demanded his name in a slow voice. The captive answered, Tiho, voice trembling as he repeated his name. They probed further and asked how old he was this year. He said he was 21 and kept his eyes fixed on the floor. One man seized his jaw and forced his face up with a harsh grab. The room glowed faintly with leftover blue light from the departed gate. Kang Hyuk stood over the kneeling captive while another man leaned close and taunted him. They demanded his name and forced his face upward with a hard grab. The captive answered Tiho in a trembling voice with eyes fixed on the floor. Someone snarled that the man who once watched over him was dead now. They ordered him to understand his place and to give his sister's number. The other men joked about the sister's looks and made crude comments. The room glowed with leftover blue light from the closed gate as sweat beaded. Each fresh insult tightened the captive's shoulders and left him apologizing quietly. Kang Hyuk remembered rumors about what hunters did in dungeons after the interrogation. He recalled Kang Min's Gargoa Guild as the one guild that never caused trouble. Kang Min was the strongest hunter there, and he punished recklessness without exception. He investigated every mistake thoroughly and held the responsible hunter accountable. That strictness maintained order, but also created many enemies over time. Still, no one confronted Kang Min directly because his strength discouraged any challenge. Kang Hyuk noted how reputation and fear shaped the guild's conduct. Kang Hyuk remembered the rumors about what hunters did in dungeons after interrogations. He recalled Kang Min's Gargoa Guild and Kang Min's strict rule that punished recklessness. Kang Hyuk had awakened as a meta-human while living with his ordinary sister. To repay her care, he became a hunter and joined Kang Min's guild. Kang Min took him under his wing and watched over him. Everything seemed stable until Kang Min died in a mysterious accident. After that death, other hunters shifted from respect to hostility and began preying on Kang Hyuk. Kang Hyuk had lived under Kang Min's protection and resented hunters' cruelty after his death. In the dim dungeon, he stood pressed between hostile hunters who circled and taunted him. He thought he wanted to kill them, but admitted he remained too weak to act. A heavy boot crossed into view as a new figure stepped toward the group from the shadows. The attackers shouted and scanned the chamber, calling for the intruder. Tension tightened as discovery or intervention became possible in that instant. Kang Hyuk had lived under Kang Min's protection and had resented the hunter's cruelty after Min's death. In the dim dungeon, he remained pressed between hostile hunters who circled and taunted him. He thought he wanted to kill them, but admitted he remained too weak to act. A heavy boot crossed into view as a new figure stepped from the shadows and the attackers shouted. The intruder revealed a tall man in a suit with cold red eyes and a retinue of skeletons. He demanded where Hwang Kyuho was. The chamber fell silent and tension tightened around Kang Hyuk. Kang Hyuk had endured hunters' cruelty since Kang Min's death and remained trapped among hostile men. He thought of fighting but felt too weak to act. A heavy boot signaled an intruder's approach. The new figure stepped forward and revealed a tall man in a suit with cold red eyes and a blue-green flame behind him. The man demanded to know where Hwang Kyuho was. The chamber fell silent. The hunter's taunt stopped, and tension tightened around Kang Hyuk as the intruder's voice filled the room. Kang Hyuk had suffered under the hunters since Kang Min's death and remained trapped among hostile men. He wanted to fight but felt too weak to move. A heavy boot signaled an intruder, and a figure advanced, revealing a tall man in a suit with red eyes and a blue-green flame behind him. The stranger demanded to know where Hwang Kyuho was. The room went quiet and the hunters stopped jeering. Tension closed around Kang Hyuk as the newcomer's voice echoed. A pale young man with blood on his cheek was shown, and voices asked who he was and if Kyuho knew him. The room fell tense as hunters closed ranks around a lone suited figure near the pillar. A heavy boot had signaled the man's arrival, and hunters demanded how he had entered their guarded rooms. They shouted that the association should have posted guards at the entrance. Kang Hyuk remained beaten on the floor and could not risk movement. Hunters circled and shouted in suspicion. A cold blue-green light flickered behind the suited man, and red glinted in his eyes. The newcomer's presence stilled the jeers and stretched the silence thin. Tension had thickened as hunters ringed a lone suited man near the pillar. A heavy boot had announced the man's arrival, and questions rose at once. Hunters demanded how he had entered the guarded rooms and why. Kang Hyuk lay bruised and barely moving on the cracked floor beneath them. A cold blue-green light flickered behind the suited man, casting alarming tones. Red gleams showed in the newcomer's eyes, and the room stilled. Hunters demanded Hwang Kyuho's whereabouts and pushed the question toward the wounded man. Kang Hyuk raised a bloodied hand and said Hwang had already left. He asked instead what the suited man's relationship to Hwang was. Hunters had ringed the suited man beneath the pillar while tension pressed the air. A heavy boot had marked his arrival, and questions met him immediately. A cold blue-green light flickered behind the suited man, and red gleams showed in his eyes. Kang Hyuk lay bruised and barely moving on the cracked floor beneath them. He had raised a bloodied hand and said Hwang had already left. The suited man stared down and asked in a quiet voice, "Am I too late?" Kang Hyuk looked up, blood streaking his face, and blinked at the question as Hunter's legs framed him. Hunters had ringed the representative beneath the pillar as tension pressed the air. A heavy boot had marked his arrival, and questions had met him. A cold blue-green light flickered behind him, and red gleams showed in his eyes. Kang Hyuk lay bruised and barely moving on the cracked floor. He had raised a bloodied hand and said Hwang had already left. The representative stared down and asked if he was too late. He then turned and called to a nearby injured man, asking where he had gone, and the man screamed. The hunters closed their ring as the representative stood beneath the pillar, blue-green light behind him. Kang Hyuk lay bruised on the cracked floor, raising a bloodied hand and whispering that Hwang had left. The representative ignored the accusation and demanded where Hwang Kyuho had gone. He refused to answer the stranger's tone and said the matter was personal. The hunters pressed him, stepping forward and demanding who he was and why he sought Kyuho. The room pulsed with tension as voices rose and the injured man screamed again. The representative stood unmoved under the light, his red eyes fixed on the group. Under the pillar's blue-green light, the representative's red eyes flared. He answered the hunters with force and released a focused beam. The beam struck a man in midair and pierced his mouth and throat. Blood sprayed as the victim crumpled. The hunters reeled back in shock and fear. The representative then spoke with cold clarity and asked once more where Hwang Kyuho was. A sickly blue aura bloomed around him, and ghostly faces swirled within it. The room held its breath while the bloodied body fell silent and the question hung heavy. Under the pillar's blue-green light, the representative's red eyes flared. He had answered the hunters with force and struck a man in midair, piercing his mouth and throat. Blood sprayed and the victim crumpled while the hunters reeled back in shock. The representative demanded again where Hwang Kyuho was. A sickly blue aura bloomed around him, and ghostly faces swirled within it. The hunters shouted and rushed forward with knives, but their blades met only air. The representative's power lifted and flipped them, cracking a nearby wall and hurling them aside. The room waited while the questions still hung heavy. Under the pillar's blue-green light, the representative's red eyes had flared, and his demand had hung in the room. The pillar cracked loudly, and fragments fell as a chilling wind swept the hall. From the breach, spectral skeletons poured out, their bone plates clattering in ordered rows. Each skull burned with a red glow as the sickly aura spread. The hunters lay flipped and stunned, blades still in empty air. The undead descended toward them, and the representative stood over the chaos, his question unanswered but enforced by the reanimated soldiers. Under the pillar's blue-green light, the representative's demand had shattered the hall, and the pillar had split. Spectral skeletons had poured out in ordered ranks, each skull burning red as the sickly aura spread. The hunters had been tossed and lay stunned while the undead descended. Kang Hyuk had risen and met them head-on, blade cutting at a skeleton's throat as others closed in. Bone plates had clattered, and shards of energy had spiked through the air, narrowing space around him, until every movement decided his fate. The hall had split under the pillar's blue-green light, and the skeletons had poured out. Kang Hyuk had risen alone and drove his blade through a skull before more closed in. Energy shards narrowed space and struck him across the face with violent force. He screamed as red blood spattered, and his vision blurred from the impact. Nearby, a guard collapsed, a spear lodged through his back, breath fading fast. The hunters lay stunned while the undead advanced, and the hall filled with cold light. The hall had split under the pillar's blue-green light, and the skeletons poured out in a cold tide. Kang Hyuk rose alone and drove his blade through a skull before more closed in around him. Energy shards narrowed the space and struck his face, spraying red blood across the stone. The undead swarmed the hunters and guards, slashing and stabbing at every gap. Kang Hyuk fell back and crawled along the floor, gasping for help as his vision blurred. A heavy impact struck the wall nearby, and dark fluid splattered across the floor. He forced himself upright on shaking arms, panting, eyes wide as the skeletons closed in. He clawed at the floor and lurched upright as the undead closed on him. His eyes widened, and he shouted at the things in disbelief. He struck out again, but his blade slid off their glowing bones without effect. A skeleton seized him and drove a ribbed spear through his side, spraying blood across the stone. He staggered and clutched the wound as blood ran down his hip. Confusion and pain erased strategy from his face, while darkness crept along the edges of his sight. Kang Hyuk crouched on the floor as skeletal guardians circled him in cold blue light. He reached uselessly for his wound and could not steady his breath. A suited man stepped from the glow and placed his boot deliberately near Kang Hyuk's knee. He issued a single harsh warning and said the captive had only one chance. A black thought bubble demanded where Hwang Kyuho was located with jagged red text. The man's eyes flashed red beneath the light. The undead remained motionless as the chamber tightened around the two figures. Kang Hyuk crouched on the floor while skeletal guardians circled in cold blue light. He reached uselessly for his wound and struggled to steady his breath. A suited man stepped from the glow and pressed his boot near Kang Hyuk's knee. He issued a harsh warning and demanded Hwang Kyuho's location with flashing red eyes. Kang Hyuk hesitated and wondered who the man was and what he wanted. He lied that Hwang Kyuho was probably in a club in Gangnam. The suited man asked if he wanted to live and waited. Kang Hyuk answered yes, and the man ordered them brought to that club. The captive's surprise cut through the chamber as the undead remained motionless. Kang Hyuk had lied about Hwang Kyuho's location to survive the confrontation. He rose and walked ahead while stammering that he did not know. He promised he would try his best to find him as the suited man watched. The man's eye flashed red and the group moved toward the exit. A sudden blue rift opened in the station and hummed with power. Two figures halted at the glowing portal and peered into its light. Nearby station guards noticed the anomaly and exchanged puzzled looks before approaching cautiously. Kang Hyuk had lied about Hwang Kyuho's location to survive the confrontation. He rose and walked ahead while stammering that he did not know. He promised he would try his best to find him as the suited man watched, his eye flashing red. The group moved toward the exit. A sudden blue rift opened in the station and hummed with power. Two figures halted at the glowing portal and peered into its light while nearby guards approached cautiously. A guard questioned whether they were the only survivors and recorded their shaken answers. Kang Hyuk had lied about Hwang Kyuho's location to survive the earlier confrontation. He rose and walked ahead, promising he would try to find him while the suited man watched with a red-flashed eye. The group moved toward the exit as a blue rift opened and hummed with power. Two figures stopped and peered into the light while nearby guards approached cautiously. A guard began to question the shaken survivors and record their answers. The suited man then demanded why Hunter Hwang Kyuho was not present and how they had defeated the boss, and both figures fell silent. Kang Hyuk had lied about Hwang Kyuho's location during the earlier confrontation. He stepped forward and forced a nervous smile to cover his guilt. He gestured and said the suited man had come in and taken care of it. The suited man kept his arms crossed and watched with a red-flashed eye. The blue rift behind them hummed with lingering power and cast cold light. Nearby survivors were shaken, and the guards began recording their statements. Both figures fell silent under the suited man's steady gaze. Kang Hyuk had lied about Hwang Kyuho's location during the earlier confrontation. A young attendant stepped forward and forced a nervous smile to cover his guilt. He tipped his cap and said a suited man had come and managed it. The suited man kept his arms crossed and watched with a red-flashed eye. The blue rift behind them hummed with lingering power and cast cold light.